Hello, and welcome to another video from 3.5 Archive. Today, we're going to be doing our third D&D 3.5 base class review, looking at the Hexblade, which comes to us from the Complete Warrior sourcebook. Hexblades blend magical talent and martial prowess with a touch of the dark side of magic. They play with the magic of luck and fate, hence their name, as they place hexes on their foes. They're never good aligned, but they aren't necessarily evil. They won't find friendships in others of their ilk very often, but also rarely will they turn on each other. Hexblades mostly adventure for personal gain and tend to be scoundrels. The Hexblade is not known for being a powerful class, and in fact is considered one of the weakest out there. We will take a look at why that is, and keep in mind that while with a full base attack bonus and the accompanying martial weapon proficiency, the Hexblade can still always contribute at worst as a mediocre frontline fighter type. But then again, so could the Warrior, and that's an NPC class. So, what does the Hexblade give you? You get a D10 hit die, a full base attack bonus, and a good will save. You get 2 plus your intelligence modifier for skill points at each level, multiplied by 4 at level 1 of course. You get proficiency in all simple and martial weapons, and proficiency with light armor. You are also able to cast spells in light armor, at least your Hexblade spells. You don't get any shield proficiency though. Already this seems to bias the Hexblade toward wielding a two-handed weapon like a greatsword, which is a good strategy in 3.5 anyway. Light armor might initially make this prestige class seem like a terrible frontliner, but there are plenty of other ways to make up for lack of heavy armor proficiency, and as armor class decreases in importance at higher levels, it matters less and less anyway. As for class skills, you have Bluff and Diplomacy alongside Knowledge Arcana and Spellcraft. This is a charisma-based class, so you can be a very social character and an excellent party leader, or face as they're sometimes called. So with that, let's take a look at the Hexblade's class features. The core of your class features is your Hexblade's Curse, which you get at level 1. This lets you put a hex on someone within 60 feet of you as a free action. They have to make a will save or get -2 on attacks, saves, damage, skills, and so on for 1 minute. You get 1 use per day at level 1 and another use every 4 more levels at 5th, 9th, 13th, and 17th levels. Hexblade's Curse is a pretty good ability starting out. It's a free action, so you aren't sacrificing your entire turn to debuff your opponent. You effectively sicken your opponent, and the penalty to damage is really great, especially in encounters with only one opponent. Looking at it this way, even if your opponent hits despite that penalty to hit, you're still automatically causing there to be less damage dealt to your allies, so it's always providing some sort of benefit if your opponents are attacking you with attack rolls. And we do have to look at this as being almost equivalent to a single spell slot. The Hexblade only gets 1 of them. He doesn't get more uses per day for his charisma bonus, and this is also his only first level feature. Compare this to the Duskblade, who gets a whole suite of level 1 spells alongside features at first level. Admittedly, most of them can't be cast as a free action, but some can as swift actions, which is pretty much the same thing. So already we can see the issue with the Hexblade. This is a class that requires good physical abilities as well as good charisma. This class needs as many good ability scores as the Monk does, and is second to Paladin only in terms of multi-ability dependence. In return, it gets not the versatility of a Cleric or Druid or even a Wizard, but a single trick it can use once a day. Moving on to second level, you get Arcane Resistance. This gives you a bonus on your saves equal to your Charisma bonus, but only against spells and spell-like abilities. That's going to be a significant percentage of what you make saves against, but not everything. You only get a good will save, so this will only somewhat make up for not having a good reflex or fortitude save. At level 3, you get Metal, which is like evasion but for fortitude saves. It is far less common to run into such effects that have a partial effect on a failed save, but they do exist. Still, this feature isn't very useful, and level 3 is close to a dead level for the Hexblade. At level 4, you get the ability to summon a familiar, which can be incredibly useful. You also get your first spells. You cast similarly to a Ranger or Paladin with 4 levels of spells, except you have a set number of spells known, and you know more spells than you can cast each day, similar to a Bard. Your spell list has cantrips mixed into the first level slot. Sleep is a first level spell for you, but it has all but entirely lost its utility by level 4. Karmic Aura and Tasha's Hideous Laughter are going to be some of your best combat spells at this level, but you don't get many per day, so you're forced to use them sparingly, and even then they aren't the greatest. Classes that start casting at level 4 and have the accompanying half-level caster level are forced to focus more on utility spells. You also get a familiar at level 4, which can give you a small skill boost and also serve you in combat. A familiar having half your hit points is a lot less disappointing on a D10 hit die class than a D4 hit die class. With the Augment Familiar spell available to you as a level 1 spell, you give your familiar +4 to its physical ability scores, as well as damage reduction 5 and +2 on saves. This can really help keep it alive in a fight, but unfortunately a lot of the familiar's usefulness, aside from scouting, comes by delivering touch spells, and the Hexblade doesn't have much in the way of those. Touch of Idiocy is one of the few, and it's decent, but again, really not that great. So there isn't a whole lot of use for your familiar unless you take Improved Familiar and want to use all your limited spell slots on making your familiar a fairly mediocre combat ally. At level 5, and at every level divisible by 5 thereafter, you get a bonus feat. You get to choose this from a very limited list made up of the Spell Focus and Spell Penetration feat trees. This is pretty much the same as what a wizard gets, but a much more narrow version of it. While the wizard can take powerful item creation feats, the Hexblade can get a bit more save DC for his pitifully low-leveled spells, or a bit better attempt to beat caster level checks with his halved caster level. These bonus feats are a bandage on one of the class's weak points, and they don't do much to make it any better. At level 7, your Hexblade's Curse increases its penalty from -2 to -4. This helps it keep up with level scaling, especially for damage. Theoretically, a -2 should matter the same at any level, assuming attack bonuses and armor class rise roughly in line with each other. Realistically, though, attack bonuses scale far faster, and armor class just can't keep up in most cases, so this becomes more necessary. By now you have 2 uses a day of Hexblade's Curse, and a -4 to all d20 rolls and weapon damage rolls is nothing to scoff at, but it's really not going to be that impressive, as we'll see. Something about, crowd control abilities or just control abilities in general is that the best version of one of those is to just kill your enemy faster. And a, very lethal spell like a Disintegrate or a Power Word Kill or Finger of Death is going to be a lot better than a penalty to hit and damage. But that is not the Hexblade's domain, so really shouldn't linger on that too much. It's a decent ability for what it is, and it still retains its usefulness at level 7. At level 12, you get your last unique ability, which is Aura of Unluck. This is an aura you can activate as a free action, and it gives any melee or range attack against you a 20% mischance. It lasts a number of rounds equal to 3 plus your Charisma modifier, so realistically it will last through one encounter without issue. You get 1 use per day at level 12, then a second use per day at level 16, and a third use per day at level 20. This ability is effectively like casting the spell Blur, but as a free action. A Quicken Blur spell would be the equivalent of a 6th level spell, which a wizard at this level could cast. Would a wizard ever cast that? Probably not. This ability effectively gives you 20% more hit points, but only against attacks, and at higher and higher levels, monsters use more and more breath weapons and similar abilities that don't require attack rolls. 3 uses per day of a spell that is 2nd level normally. Even as a free action, this ability isn't very good. You do get a greater Hexblade's Curse at level 7 that increases the penalty from Hexblade's Curse to -4, and a Dire Curse at level 19 that makes the penalty -6. This helps it scale with level and does something to make it more effective, but at higher levels, a lot of attack bonuses far outclass, if not outright exceed, the average character armor class. The penalty on saving throws becomes far more important, but at the same time, you have to worry about the saving throw attached to your Hex itself. Fortunately, there are almost no creatures immune to curse effects, unlike Charm and Mind Affecting that don't work on huge swaths of enemies you might face. Even so, needing the target to fail a save to get that penalty makes it a less tempting option. Ability focus on your Hexblade's Curse can help a bit in that department, but it still will only do a little bit overall. So looking at the Hexblade as a whole, you get the Hexblade's Curse feature, the Aura of Unluck feature, and some bonus feats that progress throughout the class. You also get spellcasting kin to a ranger or paladin, but that does not make a functional class by itself. Far from it. Even comparing to ranger and paladin, which themselves aren't particularly strong classes, you find yourself about on par, except paladin has a better spell list and a mount, and ranger gets an animal companion. You get a familiar, which is useful but perhaps not as strong in combat. Comparing yourself to the fighter is far more sobering. You find that the fighter gets access to a lot of options that would let them make an enemy shaken and demoralize them, especially with the help of something like the Zentrum fighter substitution levels, if those are allowed. Even if they aren't, heavy armor proficiency essentially replaces Aura of Unluck. Even if armor class recedes, you can build good armor class with heavy armor to make yourself much harder to hit by higher level enemies, and if you really want a mischance, you can get a Cloak of Displacement. The sheer number of bonus feats that a fighter gets as well just breaks down any advantage the Hexblade might have had almost completely. The Duskblade, released much later in 3.5's lifespan, puts the Hexblade to shame even further. While a different kind of class, it only gets one more level of spellcasting, but it gets it throughout the class progression, and it integrates spellcasting much more into the class identity. The hit die is a bit worse, but it is still a full casting, full base attack class, as close to full casting as could be allowed in 3.5. It even gets medium armor proficiency later on. As a result, the Hexblade as written is in a sorry state. It is a playable class, if a somewhat disappointing one, as a two-handed weapon with a full base attack bonus is at least playable, but with only light armor proficiency, it's hard to be the party's frontliner. It certainly isn't good, maybe worth a dip or two for a particularly weird build in a lower level campaign, but not much else. Overall, as is, it deserves 4 stars for concept, as it does have a unique and dark and occult flavor, blending witchcraft and ruthless fighting skill, but it only gets 2 stars for execution. It's not outright horrific, despite what a lot of people say, but it lacks enough meat to be playable long term. So how can we fix it? Well, one of the D&D 3.5 designers, Mike Merles, did give out his own personal fix for the class in a post on the official D&D forums that existed at the time. Essentially, it gave the class a good fortitude save and made its curse usable a number of times per day equal to charisma modifier +1. It also wouldn't be used up if the target made it save. His fix also allowed the Hexblade to have medium armor and light shields like a Duskblade did. Lastly, at level 6, 8, 11, 14, and 18, the Hexblade got the ability to cast a standard action spell as a swift action. So essentially, up to 5 uses per day of free quicken spell. These are some interesting ideas, but do they save the Hexblade? Well, medium armor gives the Hexblade the same defensive capability as the Barbarian, but without the D12 hit die or the ability to have quite as high of a constitution, since he still needs to worry about charisma. That higher hit die is partly how the Barbarian tolerates having medium armor proficiency. So the Hexblade still won't be a frontline fighter. What about as a true dedicated debuffer? Well, more uses per day of the Hex are a huge deal, but it doesn't make up for such a limited spell list alongside it. Duskblade admittedly has a fairly limited spell list as well, possibly more limited in scope than Hexblade in a lot of ways, but still the Hexblade will have a hard time making enemies fail saves against his spells. Something to compensate for that would make him more of an offensive spellcaster and better able to use his Quicken Spell ability. While your Dungeon Master might not approve all of, or even any of, these changes to the Hexblade, they definitely are reasonable. That said, make sure some members of your party will be able to tolerate you as a second-line fighter before playing a Hexblade. You can't be a real frontline fighter without a very strong secondary fighter backing you up, if you do choose to play the Hexblade. And in a party of all spellcasters, you can serve as a passable melee fighter alongside hordes of summoned monsters. Still, you will probably feel outclassed in either scenario. Duskblade has this problem too to an extent, but not nearly as badly. Before we finish up, let's take a look at some supplemental options for the Hexblade. Being an early release in 3.5's history, the Hexblade had plenty of time to get extra options. It got some, but not nearly as many as you'd expect. In the Player's Handbook 2, it got the Dark Companion alternate class feature, replacing the familiar with a Shadowy Panther. It gives enemies adjacent to it an automatic -2 on its saves and AC. At first glance, this seems like a cop-out for Hexblades who just want the flanking benefits of a familiar without the risk or work of keeping track of it. But that -2 to saves, on top of your Hexblade's curse, can really help make your enemies extremely vulnerable to the spells of your allies, if not your own far weaker spellcasting. This one is definitely worth considering, if you don't mind giving up scouting. And in a party with another wizard you are softening up foes for, you will have somebody else with a familiar to do the scouting anyway. Speaking of familiars, there's also the option of the Draken familiar from Dragon Magic, who gives up the ability to deliver touch spells in return for a 15-foot cone of fire breath weapon. It only deals 1d6 plus half your class level, but it might be better than the base option if you don't choose a lot of touch spells. Still, delivering a poison or touch of idiocy from your pet bird is probably a lot more entertaining. So the Hexblade is definitely a weak class, even though it has some unique features. It is playable in its base form, but not recommended, as it fills neither the role of a fighter or a spellcaster very well. It can almost replace the Bard as a debuffing alternative to the Bard's buffing, but it does a much worse job of it, seeing as it's focusing on debuffing a single target rather than buffing your whole party with Bard Song. With the recommended fixes, it does perform better, but it's definitely going to be one you pick for flavor reasons, not for power. And that's okay, but it's definitely something you want to be aware of before you choose to take any number of levels in the Hexblade for your character. So that'll be about it for this D&D 3.5 class review. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, and so on. And let me know which D&D 3.5 base class you'd like to see me review next. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time here on 3.5 Archive.